What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit a million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, touchy topic. We're going to do what we always do, though. We're going to skip the caterwaul and we're going to turn down the noise. We're going to get to some actual facts. Regan Ferrell's joining us. Impressive resume for her, formerly with Cato. She's with Old Pro Productions. She's also with the Narrative Project. You know how big of fans we are of that because they do what we do. They just get to the data and let you make up your own mind. Regan, how you doing?
I'm doing really well. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for the time. Okay. When we just announced this topic, people kind of get a strong reaction. So I'm going to start out by explaining why we talk about this particular problem at hand. People will roll their eyes or they have their preconceived notions about sex workers. But the way we're going to address it today is if you're concerned about criminal justice, if you're concerned about social justice, if you're concerned about people's rights, this is the bleeding edge of how sometimes the police and the criminal justice system start getting their mission creep into people's rights, and they do it under the banner of, well, they're sex workers and they're sex trafficking and these things, and then the rights start going to the wayside because the buzzwords have more power than the rights, and that's the backwards way to do it. That's really the issue at hand below the nomenclature that kind of freaks people out, isn't it?
It certainly is. Sex workers are often the canaries in the coal mine when it comes to different contentious issues. That can be criminal justice. It can be online with CDA 230 and FOSTA SESTA. Often we see content removed that's sexual in nature before we see anything else salacious. And it happens with cryptocurrency as well. Sex workers were early adopters of crypto, of Ethereum, of Bitcoin, because they're always incentivized to try out new financial structures. And you first see regulation occurring to sex workers before you see it happen more broadly.
And since you brought it up, let's do this by way of background. You talked about FOSTA. This had wide-ranging effects that I think a lot of people, even very online people, probably don't realize. I can remember 10, 12 years ago, I was living in Vegas when Redbook went down. That was a huge issue. Everybody probably more familiar maybe with Craigslist. We're starting to date ourselves, but imagine Craigslist being out of date, but it is. Craigslist went through this issue. Redbook went through this issue. Even the big giants like Facebook and Twitter have had to answer questions about this, especially Twitter, because they actually allow adult content. These things like the FOSTA thing, it was done under the guise of cracking down on sex workers and sex trafficking, but it really affected almost everybody's internet, didn't it?
It changes the landscape entirely. And you still see FOSTA SESTA cases coming through. You're going through the Backpage trial right now. It restarted on February 22nd. And you're seeing the Earn It Act go through legislation currently, which is just a further curve out of CDA 230, internet regulation, content moderation.
And like I said, help me with the dates here. Redbook, that was, 10, 12 years ago now, probably. And
yes, it was 2012, 2013.
Yeah, and those folks are just now getting their trial stuff. They really went after those folks basically because they said, do this, and they said, no, we're not going to do it. We've seen the government do this with the IRS. We've seen them do it with prosecutors. They're doing it with the internet now, and they're using sex work and human trafficking as the guise. But in the case of the Redbook now, they're getting retried because it turns out that wasn't the case at all, was it?
No, and in the case of Backpage, they were actually working with the DOJ. They ran all of their images through the missing persons database for the DOJ. They worked with local precincts and officers in order to find trafficking victims. And these websites that have sprung up in place of Backpage have no agreement with local police officers, and it's become more difficult to find trafficking victims. They have to resort to the traditional method, which is asking on the street.
Yeah, which we know how that goes because now you're having police interactions, and we know how those can go sometimes.
Certainly.
Regan Ferrell joining us on Heard Tell. All right, I'm just going to throw you the question before we dig into the issue, the pushback. Well, it is illegal, so why do I care?
It is illegal, but I try to begin with a harm reduction framework. If your main issue is helping victims, of helping people get out of something that you feel is immoral or is threatening them, then I completely understand. But the best way to do so is decriminalizing sex work. Then you're not bothering anyone who, out of their own volition, has engaged in this or needs to engage in this work in order to provide for their family. Sex work is often referred to as a victimless crime. It's not so dissimilar to other things that are completely legal, such as selling your plasma. We can have a longer debate about the ethics of work and labor if we want to, but that's not for today. But a lot of people will take jobs that they don't either care about or are actively destructive to them. I think of my father working in factories his entire life. He was not able to stand up straight anymore. And so when you're talking about sex, it's often because people feel some sort of way about the morality. And that's why it's criminalized.
Yeah. Now, let's get some nomenclature done. There is a difference between decriminalizing it and making it completely legal. There's a little bit of a nuance there, just so everybody has the nomenclature right. What's the difference between legalizing it and decriminalizing it? This is language we hear with marijuana a lot of the times. We've seen it with gambling now, where gambling has gone mainstream. Just give folks the nuance of that a little bit of what exactly we're talking about here, because it comes off like we're going to have societal approval of something, and that's not exactly what we're talking about here.
It's not tacit approval. Decriminalizing sex work is preferred by sex workers because it doesn't hold a criminal penalty. Legalization often looks like what's available in Reno, Nevada, for example, which is just a state-owned monopoly. It imposes harsh regulations. Sex workers there are only able to work in the state-owned brothels. They're not allowed to work as independent contractors. And they actually turn over about 50% of their wages to the pimps, the brothel owners, in that system. Decriminalization allows sex workers to operate as independent contractors, form their own coalitions, really work out what they want to and make their own hours.
Now, over in Europe, because I lived in Germany 2 different times, over in Europe, other parts of the world, this is already kind of the standard, and yet somehow their societies have not completely collapsed into burning piles of nothingness. I'm being a little facetious because, again, I understand this is icky to people. I understand a lot of people have a moral problem with it, but they call this the world's oldest profession for a reason. Human nature is undefeated. Some of this is us beating our heads against the wall against something that's going on, and we just don't seem to want to have a realistic conversation about it, do we?
No, not at all. This is going to continue happening. You're not going to see the oldest profession immediately cave in the moment that you have criminalized it. You haven't. It still continues in the shadows, and it is just really dangerous for the people involved.
So this goes back to what we were talking about, harm reduction. You're not going to take somebody that's working on the street or out of a hotel room or whatever stereotype you have in your head about sex work. You're not going to take them from 0 to getting a college education and a middle-class job. That doesn't go from 0 to 60. So like we've seen, again, I hate to use the examples, but people understand things with legalizing drugs and drug reduction and drug harm reduction. Gambling's another example. If we're going to have good policy in these fields, even if you're dead set against them, there's a reality here of, hey, these people can't go from 0 to 60 to doing it to dead stop. You've got to have some middle grounds and some steps involved, don't you?
Entirely. Often human trafficking victims' first experience with the police is in handcuffs, not as they're being helped. And it's incredibly difficult for a lot of these human trafficking victims, once it's discovered that they're victims, to overturn their convictions. And you can imagine a world where sex work is decriminalized and there's no record. And so this person is found out to be a victim. They receive resources, help, job training, and they're not spending all of their hard-earned cash trying to overturn a conviction that is wrongly imposed upon them.
We've seen it in other areas of the criminal justice system, especially on what we call the low end, which we probably shouldn't refer to at that end, but the petty crime end, things like this. This is really a situation, again, like drug use, like recreational drug use. We seem to be making more criminals than we actually seem to be doing anything about actual crime, don't we?
We certainly do. Your hearing pushes for something called the end demand model, which sex workers advocate against. This criminalizes the client, but not the worker. In practice, this happens in Amsterdam, for example. In practice, this actually just drives the transaction further underground because sex workers will work to protect their money, their transaction, and their client. You have a very traditional sort of leaning in the window, saying hello, offering the prices. This can't happen under the end demand model because you have to speed up the entire transaction. The client is often anxious of getting arrested, and so instead, the worker will just hop in the car, and then they have to negotiate once they're already in the car. They can't assess the situation before they're engaging.
Yeah, and you can imagine how that power structure goes if you get somebody with bad intentions in a big hurry. We're talking to Regan Ferrell, Young Voices contributor, also does some other work with things like Old Pro Foundation. We're going to come back after the break. We're going to actually back up what we're saying with some criminal stats. The police themselves tell you why this model does not currently work. And we're going to use an example everybody's aware of. We just had it last month, the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl for football is also the Super Bowl for not only sex work stereotypes, but sex work's conspiracy theories. We're going to get into that a little bit, human trafficking, more with Regan Ferrell right after this.